the Nutrimedical Report. It is open lines at any topic, 800-259-5791. And I want to open up with some international news just to summarize. It turns out that up to 1,500 plus British citizens are fighting with ISIS. And in fact, it was a gentleman on the video with a British accent, a Muslim, that beheaded Mr. Foley, the journalist that was involved doing journalistic activity in the area in the Middle East. So this is pretty disturbing, and people need to understand they were not complaining when ISIS was working to, quote, change regime of the Bashar al-Assad regime of Syria, but they started to complain when they entered into Iraq and it started, quote, fighting on the side against America and NATO in the West. What do they expect? And not only that, they've given these terrorists all kinds of advanced weapons, including Stinger missiles, etc., and manpads that can take out European or American jets. So, to me, this is just stupid, just like the stupid comments that are not being heard from the FAA as to why they're not protecting airlines and blocking all direct flights or indirect flights or even travel from anybody coming from these countries that have been even one day in these countries where Ebola is a problem. And I want to go over some of the latest, what I call Ebola-type news and other issues that are in the news articles right now, because people don't understand just how desperately late the hour is in terms of what's going on. Let's start off with some of the top news items here. Firstly, and it's all posted up in Nutrimedical, Israeli airstrikes kill 3 top Hamas commanders, and of course what they did is they tried to kill the top Hamas commander, and they killed his child and his wife. I mean, come on. Palestinians say Israel airstrike targeted missed the top Hamas commander. Qatar, and of course it turns out Qatar, which is of course the funder of a lot of the terrorism, the super rich, ultra rich, tiny state, their top Hamas leader is actually from there. People don't realize Hamas was founded by the state of Israel. Recently had some research that's come to me that's confirmed further that there's been a fusion between the state of Israel and the Vatican. And we can see it with the actions of Mr. Shimon Peres, who's handing over a number of so-called religious sites, up to 57 of them, all over Israel to the protests of ultra-Orthodox Jews in Israel and even other secular politicians. They're totally freaked out by what's going on. Well, this has been the underlying subtext for decades, and even since the founding of the State of Israel, the plan. And if you look at the map and the flag of Europe, you see the flag, which is the bema, or the, if you want to call it the crown of light, the halo around the Virgin Mary, and the 15 stars, of course, which of course is the pentagram, which is the sign of Satan. If you actually count out and multiply the number of crossed signs, it actually turns out to be 666. So we know Europe basically is the fusion of Vatican power and the state of Israel, which is a satanic state. It's not the resurrection of the ancient state of Israel. It's like the fig tree that Jesus saw from a distance, and when he got near it, he cursed it because it had no fruit on it. And this state will have to repent before it has fruit on it, because it is rejecting and fighting against, although it tries to pretend that it supports Christianity. How can you support Christianity when we believe that Messiah was a Jew, and he was literally the one who came 2,000 years ago, while the Jews, even the secular Jews, are actually knowing that they want to eventually have a secular sacrifice, which is an abomination that desolates. It starts animal sacrifice again, and a peace treaty, which even Mr. Netanyahu is pushing for, a peace treaty to cordon off the Palestinians, but also to have a, quote, expanded greater Israeli state, where even if it's not a formal state, they will control great chunks of Syria, Iraq, and oil-producing areas right down into the Sinai, where I spent quite a bit of time with FICO back in 1999, when I was with the Prophecy Club with Stan Johnson. And FICO is the oil engineer who discovered all the 5 sites of oil in the Sinai Peninsula, also near Zohar, which is one of the ancient cities near the Dead Sea, where they have their major gas and oil production. And the Leviathan oil and gas fields that also extend right through to Cyprus, which, by the way, part of the reason for the Cyprus financial collapse was the fighting over who's going to control that, including the European bankers, those giant oil fields and gas fields, because it could supplant or replace over the next 5 years the need for oil and gas from Russia. But it's not there yet. It's 5 years away. So Russia can turn off the taps, and there's a time window to take over the Leviathan field. It's interesting it's called that, too. So Israeli airstrikes are continuing to kill women and children. We see the same thing going on with these cities in the eastern Ukraine, with Slavyansk and Donetsk and other cities being shelled. I saw an article earlier this morning of a young girl who actually received a lot of shrapnel to the side of her head. Her hand and arm was very badly injured. They said it would take a month to get all the shrapnel out of her and to continue to rehabilitate her so she'll be fine. She's a student getting ready for university. She said she's never seen dead people before. And the shelling was basically in civilian areas. And this is Mr. Poroshenko. So I don't know how much longer Mr. Putin's going to tolerate this, but he certainly, when they do finally move, is going to be devastating to Kiev. Because right now, Mr. Putin has taken moves that basically put them in a box that if they don't accept some kind of negotiated arrangement with the other parts of Ukraine, that military options will be on the table. And when Russia finally moves, look out NATO. If you try to do anything, you'll have your cities targeted as well with nuclear weapons. So this is not a game, and the Russians don't play. They play for keeps when it finally starts to roll. That's what the Germans found out. And of course, the Germans were being set up as well because the Western banks and Ford Corporation, et cetera, funded the Volga River car plant, which later was really a tank plant. And they built a number of tanks getting ready for an invasion of the Sudetenland in Germany, which is why the Germans turned and attacked against Russia on the Eastern Front. So people don't know the real history of what happened there and don't know how the Second World War broke out on the Eastern Front first. They don't understand that. They don't understand the territory that was taken from Germany in the First World War through through an armistice, not a treaty, that they were just taking back territory that was part of German territory. It's almost like Russia taking back the area of the territory where the vast majority of the people are Russian, and it historically was Russian territory. So the fact that they dare to get arrogant over the fact that Russia has taken back over the Crimea is ridiculous. And it's interesting, I was reading a report this morning that one of the supporters, his name is Symes, one of the supporters and advisors for Rand Paul is being criticized in various articles. I'm not even going to give the credit to tell where to find it. The fact is, I agree with his policy that I support Russian policy to block America's regime change in Syria. All of this damage that's going on is caused by external forces creating a destruction to the state. All these people coming in there are foreign terrorists being sent in there, a lot of them from the West, from the United States, from Canada, from Britain, from elsewhere, that are going in to fight against the Syrian regime, armed to the teeth by America, trained in Jordan by American special forces, and collaboratively moving in there to try to destroy. Now, of course, ISIS is moving into Iraq. They don't like it because now they're fighting against us, which we've armed. So, you can't have it both ways. You can have an uncontrolled beast called extreme Islam, and extreme Islam was under control during the Ottoman Empire, which is why they tolerated Christianity, Judaism, etc., for many hundreds of years, actually. And the Turks, which are pragmatists, were not interested in the idea of wiping out other religious groups, such as the extreme Sunni Wahhabist Islam. And we mentioned this yesterday, so we have to understand what's really going on there. We have U.S. Ebola patient Kent Brantley is thrilled to be alive. And, of course, one of the U.S. aid workers who recovered from Ebola is thrilled to be alive. He and another patient are discharged from hospital. The problem is these other experimental things like the ZMapp and, of course, the vaccine, which could be very dangerous because it's an adenovirus carrying two genes to create antigen for Ebola, and that means it can induce antigenic-stimulated autoimmunity. The ZMapp may have a sera that is very similar to producing antibodies against the specific pathogen, so it reduces the ability of the virus to spread in your body. And the thing that causes the problem is the virus can't replicate if it's being attacked by these sera. Simpler thing is just take your antipathogenics. Nutriodine, Silver 100, Allison Med. You do protection with the masks and defense wipes, and you don't get infected at all. And take Power C Plus regularly so there's no cytokine storm. Back in a moment with your questions. 800-259-5791. Welcome back, and your calls are welcome. 800-259-5791. Coming up at the bottom of the hour, we have our nuclear expert, Chris Harris, will be calling in, and we'll be talking about Fukushima. Brad, you had another question about Fukushima. Please detail exactly what your concerns are.
Okay, good. Do you do you see the radiation from Fukushima combining with, say, Ebola, H1N1, H1N9, and creating a super virus?
Yes, and I'll explain how it does that. They first discovered it when they were taking animals like ferrets, exposing to a cyclotron-induced radiation, because that's how you create radioisotopes for medical radiotherapy, like cobalt-60. And what they found is that they exposed animals to high levels of radiation that had a virus or pathogen present, and the virus mutated and became a super pathogen. So if you have a natural population, let's say the people around a few hundred kilometers around Fukushima Prefecture in North Tokyo, and they get infected with, say, H7N9 or some other virus, the chances that the virus can be modified under that significant free radical stress to become a super pathogen is very high. So it's not just the radiation, it's indirect effects. For example, when you expose people to high levels of ultraviolet light, it suppresses your immune system. It also tends to make pathogens in your body, your airways, etc., more likely to be under the free radical stress of your body, so you get free radical induced mutation of the virus. And if you have more than one pathogen growing in someone, such as a swine flu and an avian flu, you can get recombinants, where the virus swaps parts of DNA, like Henry Nyman's thesis, which I agree is much more scientifically based on the gene ontogeny of viral evolution, is that viruses don't evolve, they recombine and swap DNA. That's, in a sense, like viral sex. They transfer chunks of DNA of large chromosomes or sections so they can get the receptor binding domain from another virus to attach to human cells, and then they can go from being non-pathogenic or an animal virus into a very deadly virus because they contain the ability to grow at lower temperatures in the airway, to produce a very serious cytokine storm, or to produce free radical damage to airways, the brain, or to cause other serious problems. So what happened in Venice Beach, I know you mentioned you were over there and were in Southern California to visit after you came from Las Vegas. What happens is that they've converted the air into a plasma. And when you have a large amount of radioisotopes like strontium and cesium, you amplify what's called the plasma effects of the air. So if you take a tube and you expose it to an induced magnetic field, it'll brighten up, even if it's not going to connect it to a circuit, like a fluorescent tube. So you can take for example, if you take a Van de Graaff generator, you can take a tube near it, and it'll actually light up, because you actually light up the plasma inside the tube. Well, this is what happened in Venice Beach. You had a plasma of a big surge of airborne radiation. While there was a thunderstorm on, you got what's called increased or amplified ground strikes. And that's why you had this very weird and unusual coastal ground strikes that killed people. It killed one person, I think, and injured a number of others, because the air over the beach at Venice Beach actually was a plasma because of a surge of radiation coming from Fukushima to contain plutonium, cesium, strontium, radioiodine, etc., which means that you've got an electrical connection between the clouds. And the first strike, most people don't realize in lightning, is actually from the ground to the sky, to the plasma, and then from the sky back to the ground. So that's what happened. And we saw unusual storms the night before last year just south of Pendleton. We had a very weird superstorm that dumped a lot of rain on us. Luckily, the rain was coming because I looked at my radiation detectors from the monsoon rains from the south. But we have routes of air transport that are probably at higher altitudes, 26 to 30,000 feet plus, is the average, although there's going to be some at lower altitudes. We have buckyballs at the surface of the water. We have streams at both at the benthic or upper 30 feet of water, and also deep sea ocean movement along channels, if you want to call it valleys, mountainous areas on the ocean floor. So there's multiple and different routes by which the radiation is getting here. And some isotopes are dissolved in the water, so they become part of the biological stream of life and actually get incorporated into organisms that die and then drop to the bottom of the ocean floor. And others are non-dissolvable, and they either go into buckyballs, which are formed when hot radioisotopes literally float on the surface tension of the water. They can carry a number of radioiodine and radioisotopes, cesium, strontium, and other isotope molecules, including plutonium. And so we have multiple routes that these bugs, radioactive fleas we call them, bugs, can get into the biosphere. That bad lightning storm was just a warning sign that the death of the intertidal region up in the Georgia Strait in British Columbia will start moving south. And I'm going to talk about this in hours 2 tonight on the Rents program, but I'll give you a summary. right now, the first thing that's going to happen is, number one, the intertidal region will start moving south from British Columbia to the Washington State to Oregon, and then to California and down to Baja. Secondly, they'll start moving inland, so you'll start seeing the death of forest animals, where they're already seeing abnormal sores on bears, foxes, ferrets, and other animals, and you'll see a drop in birds and insect populations. And the third, finally, you'll start to seeing the crown of trees that normally grow like Douglas fir and redwood trees. They'll start dying from the top. And as they die from the top, they'll increase the chances of forest fires. Forest fires will take some time for them to reach the point where enough dead dust falls that you'll end up with a massive increase in forest fires, because you're going to get these unusual ground strikes, because radioisotopes, as I said, in the beach in California that had these weird lightning strikes, the air is now a plasma when you have a big radiation cloud that moves in. And if you have thunderstorms, you're going to get abnormal and excessive and weird lightning storm strikes to the ground that'll ignite fires. You're going to see also massive increases in miscarriages, multiple birth defects, the death of elderly from congestive heart failure, dementia, and cardiac arrhythmias and cancer rates, because cesium in the gerbil studies directly concentrated in the breasts of the gerbils and small mammals and caused a massive increase in breast cancer, what's called glandular oil failure, which includes adrenals, thyroid, sexual glands, etc. So it'll cause massive sterility and multiglandular failure. And it interdigitates with magnesium and potassium. So what it'll do is it'll induce a toxic substitute, which will cause cardiac arrhythmias, atrial fibrillation, and heart failure. And we're already seeing that in 10 and 12-year-olds in Japan. They're actually dying of heart failure. So it interferes with the hypothalamus and pituitary glands. You don't get release of the normal controlling hormones. So you get literally a block or a complete block, partial or complete block of growth hormone release, so children will stop growing. So they'll start noticing not only have we had a 400 to 800% increase in thyroid cancer since Fukushima Daiichi across the United States, not just in Western California, a 42% increase in the rate of premature death in the intensive care nursery in Pennsylvania, which is one of the largest ICNs in the country. And what's going to happen is that as this moves down the coast, all sea life on the coastal areas will try to escape and go further south, and you'll see a lot of migration. That's why the pelicans are basically gone from the pelican roosts that are off the Baja California, why the salmon run is gone, the smelts are gone, sardines are gone, why we are banned from shipping mollusks and clams and other things to China. China will not take our food anymore, neither will South Korea, will not take our coastal food from the U.S. and Canada. Yet our governments do nothing. So that's the fact. That's what's going on. So when you see those weird storms in Venice Beach, that's what's happening. So what do you think of that?
We all know that
Welcome back, and Chris Harris. Chris, I'm sure you've got some updates on what's going on in Fukushima. We talked with some questions from Brad in Las Vegas, a couple questions about the Venice Beach ground strikes where the air has been turned into a plasma. What's going on is the West Coast destruction of the intertidal region at the Georgia Strait, which is inside Vancouver Island in British Columbia, which is now being reinvestigated by Dana Durnford and his colleague. They're going back up with another exploratory team with more equipment and cameras. We're seeing plasma changes to the air, which we're going to see extreme weather, which is likely to not only kill people, but set off fires. In a fire zone where there's a lot of, although we did have some rain, it's not enough to actually stop the high fire risk. And we're going to start seeing that death zone not only go further south along the coastal region to kill the intertidal, animals and plants that are the richest, they call the nursery of the intertidal region of the oceans, but also to move inland. So we're going to start seeing dead forest animals, foxes, bears, deer, and then the crown of the trees, Douglas firs, which are a couple hundred feet high, redwood, etc. And as it moves further inland and south, it'll start to cause devastation when it hits major population areas like Vancouver, Canada, Seattle, Washington, and the Puget Sound region. The head of the Columbia River, which, by the way, they were going to redirect south for us to have the NWAPA, North American Water and Power Project, which goes past Hanford. This is going to get pretty nasty, and people don't realize it's not just a West Coast phenomena. these air currents are carrying high-altitude radiation over the Rocky Mountains, down the Midwest, all the way to Indiana, and then all across to the northeast of the United States. So it's going to have some other major effects there that are going to be much more devastating. So tell us what's happening with Fukushima, because I don't see anything positive happening out of Fukushima Daiichi in Japan. All I see is more people ignoring the fact that we have solutions that could be done, like containing the airborne release of radiation, containing the ground radiation. They've now abandoning this idea of an ice wall, and they're not talking about doing something like a starlight pylon, kind of a diversion of water, which is the aquifer above Fukushima Daiichi, creating a seawall in the containment area and a proper ALPS, advanced liquid processing system, locating the corium using ground-penetrating radar or muon radiation ion detection to tell us exactly the anatomical location and the profile of isotopes present, and the density of neutron generation, which is creating neutron beams that ionize nitrogen above Fukushima, so you can see them 30 to 40 miles up until you get too thin air that you can't see the blue light from the nitrogen atoms excited by the release of high-energy neutron beams. This is pretty scary stuff, and I don't think people realize that as it accelerates also the destruction of the ozone layer, we're going to get not only death of the oceans and death of the coastal forests, but we're going to start getting death of populations that are going to become functionally sterile, sick as hell, and develop cancer and multi-organ system failure, including especially glandular failure. But it's going to start hitting other populations transpolar in Europe. It'll cross the Rocky Mountains and cover the United States. And it also will start infecting the seas of other oceans in the world. So people think, well, it's not going to affect us. Not right away, and not as high a level of radiation, but it eventually will affect every ocean. So we tell people, don't eat filter feeder fish from the Pacific. If you're going to get scallops, which, by the way, we just had last night, get them from the East Coast. Don't realize that, if you don't filter your water that's coming in from your water reservoirs, it's going to contain isotopes. So what's happening in Fukushima? What's the latest news there? And what's happened with the IAEA here in North America with the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, the IAEA that's looking over with countries that you've done contract work for, like Korea. What I'm very concerned about is that the risk of extreme weather, which is now going to get more extreme as the air becomes more and more of a plasma, the ozone layer destruction, which is going to cause crop failures, combined with all these other events, we're going to start seeing, remember, plasma effects trigger off earthquakes and volcanoes. So as radiation increases from Fukushima, it increases along the Ring of Fire a tremendous increase in the level of plasma-induced energy transfers that cause superquakes and supervolcanic activity, so that there's a direct linkage to geotectonic events and volcanism.
Well, Dr. Bill, they're constructing a seawall, and you're right about the ice wall maybe shelved for a little bit. But remember, Fukushima is like a boat with a hole in it. And really, what do? You try to pump it out as soon as because of the groundwater that's coming in, fairly clean and runs through the plant and comes out contaminated. So before that happens, they're trying to bail it out as fast as they can, but they run out of room where you can pump this now contaminated water. So they're trying to pump out water before it even gets into the plant, or way upstream of the plant. That's upstream in the groundwater. Yeah. So it's like a hole. It's a boat with a hole in it, and you have to keep on building bigger and bigger pumps with deeper wells and bigger wells, and really that's the tack. That's the main tack for preventing more contaminated runoff from reaching the ocean around it and also the air. Now remember, NHK just came out with, NHK is a Japanese news outlet that right. Many studies are showing, this is from simplyinfo.org, that they're showing that cores, multiple cores, parts of it or some or even most of it have been ejected from the planet. We thought that too. Once you breach containment, that was one of my big concerns. Well, where'd the core go after an explosion like that, whether it be steam or hydrogen explosion or a combination of both? So it got, I always say the term, it got sneezed out all over the place. I mean, it's totally, it's a huge mess. And,
Yeah, you're talking about like the MOX reactor. There's actually 3 steps to what happened there. The first is they have superheated steam from the special fuel bundle arrays that actually create tritiated superheated water. The second is it compresses the corium, so you get especially when you get unstable plutonium isotopes, because they're making MOX reactor pellets for nuclear weapons because it was an illegal facility. And MOX is very, very touchy. So they ended up with an induced criticality from the hydrogen explosions that later created a critical, literally small nuclear explosion. So there were particles and chunks of these fuel rod assembly bundles that were identified as far as 65 to 75 kilometers away. And there are probably smaller particles that were carried 200 or 300 kilometers. So there have been estimates by scientists that there's a ring of at least 300 miles where fairly large particle plutonium and other highly dangerous isotope pellets actually made it all the way to south and north and in every direction 300 kilometers at least. Which is why the Ronald Reagan, when these things happened, they're getting sprayed with not only nanoparticles but larger particles as well of very highly radioactive material, especially from reactor 3. And all three reactors completely lost containment. They're now kind of saying that, hey, yeah, we lost containment completely. And by the way, one of the most dangerous things, it wasn't just the tsunami cutting out the power backup systems, it was the earthquake. So reactor number 1 lost containment of the reactor core with the earthquake alone. And there was also some damage to some of the cooling pools of other reactors, like an OI, that occurred right as the reactors of these other reactor sites were hit. So it's not just Fukushima that's in danger. If they have major other quakes, which, by the way, because of the release of plasma-inducing effects of geotectonics, there's been a 500% increase in level 5 earthquakes or higher in Japan. And if astrophysicists want to combat and challenge me on this, that volcanism and earthquakes are geotectonic events, and there's a change in the level of particles in space, in the solar system or galaxy, depending on the area that you're transiting through in the solar system or the galactic arm. And that changes the rate of volcanism because you change the plasma effects of the atmosphere. And as you release radioisotopes, you increase the transitive energy, so you increase the risk of having more geotectonic or volcanic events. So we're going to see a lot more bad stuff, in other words, on the Ring of Fire.
Well, Dr. Bill, even weather.com yesterday also talking about off the coast of Japan is a island that's being formed by volcanism, and what they're worried about there is a collapse of I guess it's the ash dome, and creating another tsunami that way. Now, this one is 600 miles south of Tokyo, but even still, the way
you're talking
travel and all.
It's like a giant rock mushroom made of volcanic magma that's hardened in the ocean. As it falls, it generates a giant tsunami wave. And that's, by the way, that's how most tsunamis have been made over geological history. And the best site, I think, overall for looking for new information is not only Simply Info, but also go to rents.com. You'll see the latest Fukushima updates. I do a special show on the second hour as a guest on Rents Network every Thursday evening. 4 or 5 Thursdays of the month, the second hour, which is usually 8 to 9 p.m. Pacific time, live. And there's a lot of really bad stories here. I mean, children of the U.S. Navy sailors are now getting cancers. Proof that radiation is killing the Pacific. Dana Durnford did a video. Plutonium and hundreds of different radionuclides pour in the Pacific, and they're dumping the water in directly. No filtration at all, no ALP system. And, of course, they've already proven now that the 3 Fukushima reactors melted through all containment. But we don't really even have any proper safety measures being done here in North America, because volcanism is not just increasing in earthquakes in Japan along the Ring of Fire, but also in New Madrid. There's earthquakes in Oklahoma and around the world in areas that have never been seeing earthquakes for a long time, and the frequency of level 5 earthquakes on the entire planet has increased roughly 500%. So something bad is coming. Now, it's my suspicion that there's 3 reasons for it. The first is we've changed the air to a plasma because we're geoengineering the upper atmosphere as part of our U.S. space shield, which is literally the plasma space shield against incoming nuclear weapons. And this is in addition to theater air defense, which is more advanced in the Patriot system or the Iron Dome. And, of course, it's classified, which is why I'm releasing it, because THAAD, or theater air defense, has been operational since 1982. And I was clear of this when I was told, as a physician taking care of employees at U.S. Space Command Strategic Events and Star Wars. So you won't hear them trying to criticize me. They want to just attack my reputation because they don't want you to know the truth, that they put this system up there thinking it's fail-safe, and it isn't. It's very dangerous to the planet because it turns the air into a plasma, and increases the destruction of the ozone layer, which is amplified by Fukushima dramatically. So the ozone layer is going poof. You can get a suntan at the bottom of my pool now, which you never could before. You can get damage to your eyes in the midday, and the sun is now getting very toxic. And if you don't believe me, as I tell people, please don't believe a damn thing I say. Go test for yourself. Go to LSEMF and get the radiation detectors for UVA, B, and C. And if you measure these radiations, what you're going to find, A, B, C, D, those reactions, A will tan you, B will burn you, C will give you cancer, and D will give you death. Good numbers, eh? Good letters. They explain exactly what will happen to you. And Fukushima is a warning. We are now observing the early signs of death of Mother Earth. And I'm not proposing a move toward a Mother Earth worship super religion, which the globalists want, which is the, if you want to call it, the super religion of Europe with their flag, which literally has the bema, or the crowning glory of the Immaculate Conception of Mary, and of course the goddess worship, which is pagan as well. You have to understand what's really going on is so damned evil, it's incomprehensible, and that's why they hide it in plain sight. And why they're doing nothing about Fukushima or protecting our radiation sites with equipment that's too damn old to actually properly maintain, is in fault zones where they know it won't maintain proper containment if they have a big earthquake, or extreme weather where even just the intake for water for diesel generators to make sure backup power is maintained in many reactor sites in America has already been proven to be below the high water mark. Not a good thing. So tell us more. Summarized a lot of bad stuff there, didn't I? So tell us more about what's happening in America. I mean, are they monitoring the JASCO reports? Are we getting anything, or are they still dancing?
Well, the dance is well underway, and of course there are already several plans. We talked about that the industry got together and came up with a whole bunch of guidelines and rules that say if you follow these, you're going to be much improved safety against a Fukushima-like event. But already we're realizing that many of the people who have agreed to many of the plants, we call them licensees, have agreed to going that way, and they're already asking for relaxation of the rule. Now, let me go ahead and, before I stumble over my...
So in other words, what they do is they ask for all kinds of guidelines that instead of, as I said to our guy at U.S. Space Command and White Sands Missile Base for Strategic Defense Command, I said instead of 12 really deads, will only be 11 really dead. So it's a similar thing like that. In other words, we got a risk of, say, 1 in 10 of a reactor fallout if you got a level 6 or 7 earthquake. But now they're even complaining that those are too tight. We can't afford that. Let's relax it. We can deal with 1 in 5 chance. Or
can't afford that, exactly.
Yeah, we can't afford that. So relax those things. You know, you guys can get a sharp pencil, no problem, right?
Well, you know, we already do. I think we already talked about it. You know, we're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars worth of modifications to plants, and everybody bought into it right in the beginning, and now it's coming home to roost, saying, you know what? The structure is going to cost $100 million plus $20 million a year to maintain it and to keep all the equipment, you know, ready to go and all. What if we had a little kick? Can we get a relaxation in this? Can we be awake? Let's go awake.
What it proves, basically, and this is on a balance sheet. If we talked about nuclear power as balance sheets, nuclear power doesn't work on the balance sheet. The cost, you cannot insure through the industry the liability of what 50 years of power and 2 billion years of radioisotopes can induce to a population on the planet Earth or the life forms. And as a result, nuclear power as it stands, which is boiling water with nuclear fission, is over. We need to face that. We need to also face that they've sequestered and hidden away technologies for safe nuclear power, which is nuclear fusion. And you hear the Chinese and the Russians now announcing this and saying foolish things like they're going to mine helium-3 on the moon, they're going to do all these things. We've been doing it for now 50 years. We had on the moon 6 years before the Eagle landed, which they created all these super movies out there to make sure people didn't believe we even landed on the moon. It's a conspiracy theory we landed on the moon. That's why we've never gone back, because we were never there in the first place. Ha ha. Wake, wake, nod, nod. The fact is that tokamak fusion reactors have been around for 50 plus years. that we have technology to pull full energy from the vacuum. We had Professor Jim McCanny talk about the actual plasma physics of it. We have even safer nuclear technology like pebble bed reactors and other type. But we need to phase out of nuclear reactors altogether. Even the Canadian CANDU reactors still create nuclear waste. And what they do is they're sneaky. They send their depleted uranium waste off to the Snake River plant and other facilities in the U.S. to turn into depleted uranium. And then they're shipped back. For example, I found out, because I took care of the employees working at a weapons development plant that creates most of the 50 caliber and larger shells for the Israelis that are depleted uranium. They're made in Calgary, Alberta. Little old Calgary of the wonderful, squeaky clean nation of Canada that pretends it's so nice and friendly, make DU munitions, even though they have to ship it down to get converted into DU from their spent nuclear rods because they're low-grade uranium in the CANDU type reactors. So there's another little tidbit of classified information you don't know about the so-called Canadians, how nice they are making munitions for the Israelis of depleted uranium rounds. Isn't that nice? I know about that firsthand, not secondhand. Firsthand, because I took care of the employees working on the facility in the early 80s. That's pretty nasty, isn't it?
Yeah, that actually makes a lot of sense because they do use the heavy water reactors and the non-enriched uranium, which
right.
the tailings of milling it. That actually makes perfect sense. I think you nailed it.
And they generate a lot because the largest uranium mines in the world are in Saskatchewan, Canada. They're not in Central Australia, not in Aussie land. They're in Saskatchewan, not too far off actually from the tar pits of the largest oil reserve on the planet, which is the oil tar sands, 118 by 120 miles by 800 meters deep plus. 800 to 1,200 meters. That's a long way down. That's a lot of oil. That's 100 times more oil than the proven oil reserves of every country on Earth. That doesn't even include Prudhoe Bay, the Liberty Rig, or the Turner Valley oil and gas reserves that by themselves could supply the Earth with enough oil and gas for 10,000 years. But, small but, if you keep on generating carbon dioxide from oxygen, you have to have enough plants and benthic layer of the oceans to convert it back to oxygen. Or you do, at that point, have runaway carbon dioxide because you don't have a carbon-oxygen cycle anymore because you've killed the oceans and you've cut down the forest. Like Joni Mitchell's song, cut down the trees to pave it and make a parking lot. So, closing comments. What are they doing about Fukushima? Not too dang much.
No,
what are they doing about nuclear safety?
We're left with the chronic dose. And we've already had our acute dose, and now we're getting our chronic dose of radiation.
Let's put it this way. We're all on, people say, Dr. Deagle, you're much against radiotherapy for cancer. Guess what? We're all on radiotherapy now.
Yeah.
Protect yourself. Filter your water. Eat organic food. You grow yourself if you can. Don't eat fish from the Pacific. Realize that if you're further north, that wave of death and destruction is going to move southward and inward. It's going to cross the Rocky Mountains. It's going to go over the poles to Europe and elsewhere. And if you're listening to other countries, don't be arrogant in the Southern Hemisphere. Eventually, it'll get to you, but it'll take a long time, long after the Northern Hemisphere is depopulated and dead.